Do recall an animated conversation with Brian Cox in a George in Soho. This was long before he was awarded the World of Leather chair in particle physics. It was during this conversation that I was introduced to the wave-particle duality and the measurement problem, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Schrödinger's cat, how the universe was made up of green burgers, Higgs champagne, the unfortunate inequality of bells, black-body radiation, and that the Milky Way was really an omelette and not a chocolate bar after all. He ended the conversation with the reassurance that thanks to science, things can only get better, and briefly they did, so much so that we missed the end of our universe. Or was that Al Mackenzie? Nah, he had a Chaddy accent, or at least that's how I remember it. Surely, what we call reality follows particles. It only exists when we observe it, and then jointly share this observation. Or in terms of how we currently understand it, there is no reality. So what we perceive to be real are simply vibrations until we observe them. Perhaps the real question is not why I've experienced so many things outside what others believe is reality, but why don't more of us? Is it possible that we constrain our consciousness to enable us to interact with others and to integrate into society? As already mentioned, hallucinations increase brain activity rather than reduce it. By using parts of our brain that other than the default mode mechanism, creating new pathways, and have been shown to be effective treatments for a range of mental illnesses and addictions. After all, without the illusion of space and time, we would be completely unable to function in what we believe is reality. This would mean that what we call mental illness is about opening the doors of perception. Their consciousness is not focused in the same way as the majority's, rather than a fault in mental processing. But how can I use this knowledge to help Branwell and Mauer? Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision to the limits of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer, Studies in Pessimism, the Essays. Despite all that is uncertain, we cling on to a belief in Western objectivity, believing witnesses in courts of law, trusting the limited processing information from the eyes and the fallibility of the memory, trusting in the truth rather than a series of truth, believing in axioms. I am not arguing from a postmodernist perspective here, simply reflecting my experience, which has destroyed my faith in objectivity and the one truth, but refuse to completely dispense with it. Such beliefs arise in our default mode mechanism, which has been deactivated so often in Mauer, Titi and I, in the same way as it does with Alzheimer's or autism. But now it seems to me that we allow this network to dominate so much of our lives and the way we organise society, placing too much emphasis on the rational. Even in repeating my experiences, I have reported on court cases as though the judgments are infallible. After all, we can only ascribe meaning by comparison, and this relies on our consciousness, which can be so readily manipulated. This allows us to judge others, even whole nations, as I have been guilty of, and to all Indonesians, let me profusely apologise. I just happened to be in your country when these thoughts were thrust upon me. Without the mischief of some of your countrymen, I would never have freed myself to think like this. Indonesia is a wonderful country, which I love dearly, along with its hospitable people. But there is an even more profound conclusion from the measurement problem. If God is omnipresent, then God's observation would also affect the atoms. So Sunan Sinijata was correct. After all, the God is inside us. So to avoid the trap of feeling godlike, we have to conclude that God is within us all and not just within ourselves, that we are part of a collective identity which includes the higher being that is God. Having drawn this conclusion, then why shouldn't this collective identity, including animals, plants, and what we call inanimate objects? Thus, the Kejawen liturgy becomes important once more and sends me on to another quest for enlightenment. You may now be asking, why did the ancients, people we believe to be less advanced than ourselves, seem to have a greater understanding of the nature of life? Of course, it's because their larger brains, their reducing valves, were not as closed as our own. So the very beliefs from the past, which we identify to indicate that society was less advanced, actually signify the exact opposite, and by implication, that I should be more charitable to the lack of scientific method in Indonesia. But I have argued that maybe everything is in the mind. If multiple realities exist, then can we be sure of our own reality? Indeed, a development of string theory suggests that reality is just information, and so that this information, which creates our reality, is less than 1% of the known universe. So if we can change our trajectory through positive thinking, we are simply shifting between these multiple realities. What we call reality does not create consciousness, but consciousness creates reality. In which case, I am wrong to reject the more fanciful aspects of my experience as those of others. Of course, unicorns can exist, as anything is possible, everything is within our minds. So we ourselves, our loved ones, our possessions, our memories are simply our minds. Nothing is tangible. Everything is ephemeral. Now, if reality is simply information, and we know that crystals can store information as periodic patterns, is it possible that crystals, precious and semi-precious stones, do store spirits? Well, I have already argued that anything is possible, but this conjecture is fairly close to what we call reality. If the stones do contain spirits, the soul is a waveform, nothing more than a vibration, then it is far from preposterous that the stones do contain spirits. However, following my logic, most inorganic material could also store spirits, or at least their residual vibrations. Whilst different in many respects to viruses, have a similar level of complexity or lack of it to crystals. So could there be a relationship between black magic and viruses? Do not write this off too quickly, as our experience certainly suggests this is worth exploring further. Whilst this means that everything is as real and valid as anything else, as everything is an hallucination, so what we call reality is much an illusion as our dreams, or my visions of ghosts. But this also suggests that I should place less significance on the Fortean and ghosts, as they are merely vehicles for my imagination. Indeed, the paranormal becomes the normal. Donald Hebb's sensory deprivation experiments at McGill University found out that not only was it easy to convince subjects about the paranormal, but this belief continued well after the experiments. I realise it's only a matter of time before we see the Rotherham Barry-Chuckle University or the Winstanley Wigan Casino University, but I am so encouraged that a university in Canada has honoured the creator of mucky postcards. It also confirms what in my heart I knew, and that is the point of magic, whether it be spells, jimat, wafak or necromancy, is really to focus on our minds, as we can create these changes simply by the power of our minds. Perhaps it's better to see what we call reality and the Fortean as being on a continuum and not a duality. But it is what we believe that matters, and if we really believe in ritual magic, then it is powerful in challenging and focusing the mind. However, if we believe simply in the power of our minds, then there is no need to resort to ceremonial magic. Of course, the same could be said of science and religion, especially when used for similar outcomes to magic. But I mention this not to relegate science and religion to be no more than magic. No, simply that they can be used to the same effect. This is why I am not keen for asking for favours when in prayer, and certainly no more than is sufficient, despite there being places in Muslim prayers where we encourage to do so. Indeed, to free ourselves from our fears and to lead a life contented with what is, there is no reason to ask for anything. But also it seems to me that there is a theological fallacy in asking for things when our solutions are infinitely less appropriate than those Allah would choose for us. But for all I have discovered to be true, then a supreme consciousness provides a much better explanation than the alternatives. Almost certainly, this is the profound knowledge contained in the higher veils of Kejawen. What my wife really knows all along, and why she is so dismissive of her brother, who still struggles with the lower veils akin to ritual magic. Logically, therefore, Dukan, Pa Ustad, and even Parkano have no real power except that of suggestion, which for those who are less honest is no more than a confidence trick. So Dukan, like my brother-in-law, do not know what to believe themselves, and can only fool those who are more stupid than him, of which there are few. Only we ourselves can remove our spirit possession by turning off our awareness of them. Yes, somebody like Pacano can help, because through his quietness, determination, and own belief, or will, we ourselves believe, but only through his power of suggestion. Maybe God is working through Parkano, and through him God helps us. But ultimately it is all within our minds, and only we can cure ourselves. Now we really are on the boundaries of physics and metaphysics. Physicians use Western medicines, a byproduct of the petrochemical industry, which alter our perceptions to convince us that they are working and we cure ourselves. The same is true of masters like Parkano, who convince us in his methods, and again we cure ourselves. Not once did Parkano express alarm nor doubt, and that is his greatest asset. Maybe this comes from Parkano's Catholicism and belief in God, and this is how God works through him. I truly believe if this is the intention of the helper's intervention, which actually have the effect, so the helper has to believe what they are doing will really help. But such powers are not dependent on God, although once again a supreme being provides a better explanation. I began my journey by recognising that time and space are constraints on the Western imagination, constructs to help us to describe what we believe is our universe, and according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, when we measure one with precision, the other becomes precise. Having now read Schopenhauer, what I should really say is that space, time and causality are limitations on the human mind. But now I have realised that the self is also a construct, a Freudian slip, constraining our ability to think and act. Indeed, if time and space are illusions of consciousness, as Einstein recognised, then so is the self, leaving us only with consciousness to ponder. So if my messages from Allah are also internally generated, is Allah within me? Logically, this has to be valid. God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in the man. Ibn Arabi. This means that Sunan Sittinjar was correct when he stated that it was possible for every human to articulate the divine power from within his inner self, despite the other Sunan secretly agreeing with Sunan Sittinjar Jenar. They murdered him for proclaiming this belief, and have been pains to reject godlike feelings, as these are the foundation of destructive beliefs and evil acts. Each time on my journey I uncover a profound revelation. I feel it is the ultimate, but it is simply a higher level of abstraction, as revealing the whole truth would be more than any human could cope with. This is why Kejawen has 7 veils, each nothing like, even contradicting the previous. This feels like another of those profound revelations. We are all God. God is within us all. When I love my servant, I am hearing through which he hears, his eyesight through which he sees, the foot with which he walks, and the hand with which he grasps. The Prophet Muhammad, Hadith Qudusi. You might like to see what I'm talking about as reincarnation and karma. And whilst I'm certainly not rejecting these concepts, even though most Muslims would, it simply isn't how I choose to define things. I think my reluctance is because I know that all is in the mind, and so everything is a construct or hallucination we generate. So in reincarnation and karma are abstractions which help us to understand difficult concepts, but by necessity they oversimplify. Certainly Kejawen belief incorporates such Hindu and Buddhist traditions, so my rejection has nothing to do with my Muslim faith. In any case, it'll be apparent that I'm willing to explore all traditions to assist me on my journey. Indeed, whilst the Messianic Muslims are certain there is no reincarnation, Al-Quran also enables us to come to the opposite conclusion. How can you disbelieve in Allah when you were lifeless, and he brought you to life, and he will cause you to die, and he will bring you back to life, and then to him you will be reunited. Al-Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah 2:28. So I'm willing to consider that far from there being multiple universes, there is no universe, and that everything is nothing at all. To a certain degree, this position is closer to my interpretation offered in Quantian Bayesian, but this is still to be explored within quantum theory. Western readers are probably confused by my views as a Muslim. You see, in the West, we feel that we have the right to define what a Muslim is and how they should behave, while frequently knowing very little about the religion itself. In fact, I'm often accused of not being a true Muslim by Western atheists, who will point to some of the more extreme beliefs of the Wahhabis, which only challenged the compassionate mainstream in the 18th century. So whilst Wahhabis and other Protestant Muslims behave in a back-to-basics Islam, what is their definition based on? As we need only to look to Indonesia to find Islam practiced as it was many centuries ago. Of course, Wahhabis reject Indonesian Islam as folk Islam, even suggesting takfir, and certainly Kejawen is influenced by other beliefs. But in general, the practices in Indonesia were the practices common throughout the Muslim world during the 15th century. But I proclaim my faith, pray 5 times a day, provide zakat charity, and fast during Ramadan. True, I may never go on Hajj, but only because there are so few places available to people from Indonesia, and I see Umrah as much about tourism as an obligation. We call deranged criminals Islamic terrorists, but would never accept the term Christian extremists for the Ku Klux Klan. Can you imagine the outcry there would be if Muslims claimed that all Christians worship the Mayor of Rome, and they get drunk and engage in ritual cannibalism every time they go to church? Well, people in the West feel they have the right to commit exactly the same faux pas when describing Islam. Few in the rest realise that the Bible, along with the Book of Psalms and the Tanakh, are considered holy books in Islam. And after all, and after Muhammad, Jesus, Isa and Abraham are the most important prophets. In fairness to Christians, the Messianic Muslims shout the loudest and are so certain in their beliefs, it's hard to believe that this is an extreme and minority interpretation, not an original thought, and I have been unable to trace its origins, but they say that religion is like a swimming pool. All the noise comes from the shallow end. Can you blame people in the West for confusing Islam with fascism when so many leaders in the Islamic world do exactly the same? So in reality, most people in the West really know quite a lot about Islam, as it is not so different to Christianity. They simply have been told otherwise. All my views can be found within the Sufi tradition in Islam, and certainly within Kejawen. True, some Muslims may find what I have said heretical, but then everything I have said can be found in Al-Quran or Hadith. So it's all about interpretation, as indeed is the Islamic tradition. Nevertheless, I've looked far and wide for my revelations, and I've explored the boundaries of heresy, but needed to stop myself from acting godlike, a boundary those who accuse others seem to transgress without a second thought. Indeed, the right to judge and absolve sin is itself a heresy. But accusations and counter-accusations of heresy resulted in 130 years of bloody conflict in Europe, so I'm certainly not wanting to enter such an argument. Of course, when looking at the Bible, and particularly the Old Testament, it would be possible to also find much of what I described. But the difference is that there are few truly Christian movements which embrace such thoughts. Early on in the development of the Christianity, Emperor Constantine expunged such beliefs at the First Council of Nicaea, and they were brutally suppressed by the Inquisition. Whereas Islamic societies embraced science and indeed made amazing advances and discoveries, which could only be incorporated within Christian societies following the Renaissance. So rather amazingly, Islam appears to anticipate the latest thinking in quantum mechanics to a much greater degree than mainstream Christianity does. A person who follows a path for acquiring knowledge, Allah will make easy passage to paradise for him. The Prophet Muhammad, Hadith Qudusi. Well, I guess if you've got this far with listening to me, you at least enjoyed something of what I said. I do hope that you have. And it's actually was extracts from 3 books that I've written that you can find on this channel, The Magic of Java. I'd really love you to subscribe and hit the button, and please listen to all 3 of my books. But above all, thank you for listening to this.